Hi everyone, welcome to our webinar today. The topic for this webinar is State of the U.S. Energy Storage Industry 2017 Year in Review. We have with us guest speakers from the U.S. Department of Energy and from GTM Research who will be presenting today. We also have with us our host for this webinar, Todd Olinsky-Paul, who is a project director here at CISA. Before I pass it over to them, I'd like to go over a few quick housekeeping notes. All of our attendees for this webinar are in listen-only mode. You have a couple of options to join the audio portion of this webinar. You can either connect using a telephone or using your computer mic and speakers. Very important note, you can submit questions and comments throughout the webinar by typing them into the question box on the webinar console and hitting send. We will be answering questions as time allows at the end of our presentations. We're hoping to have 15 to 20 minutes for that. So we do expect to have a lot of people on this webinar. We should have more questions than we're able to answer. So please do type your question in when you think of it. Don't wait until the very end. And that just ensures that we will be able to get to your question. A final note, this webinar is being recorded. We will send you a follow-up email within about 48 hours with a link to the webinar slides and recording. And we'll also be posting those on our website at cisa.org/webinars. So with that, I will pass it over to our host for this webinar, Todd Olinsky-Paul. Todd?
Thank you, Samantha, and welcome everybody to another in a series of STAP webinars that we do under contract to Sandia National Laboratories and with funding from US DOE Office of Electricity. This particular webinar is one that we've done now for several years. It's an annual look back at the year in energy storage. In this case, a look back at 2017. And so this is one of our most popular webinars. As Samantha said, we have quite a few people signed up and attending. So please do submit your questions as they occur to you, and don't hold them till the end. We'll get to as many as we can. And apologize if we don't get to yours, but we do the best we can with that. And as always, the webinar is being recorded and will be available in our webinar archive. I'd like to start by introducing who we are and then the panelists. Clean Energy States Alliance is a nonprofit located in Vermont. We work with state clean energy funds all over the country. As you can see on the slide, there are a lot of states in CISA. So we do a lot of work on all sorts of clean energy policy and program development. This particular project is called STAP, the Energy Storage Technology Advancement Partnership. And STAP, as I said, is conducted under contract with Sandia and funding from US DOE Office of Electricity. We happen to be fortunate to have Dr. Imre Gyuk of US DOE OE on the line with us today. He will be presenting some slides and helping to answer your questions in this webinar. In general, to give you a little background, STAP, in addition to these webinars, facilitates public-private partnerships at the state level to support energy storage demonstration project development, essentially bringing states together with DOE Office of Electricity and Sandia to jointly collaborate and support energy storage deployment. And we also work with states on policy and program development. And there's a lot of that going on at the state level right now. As you can see by the map, we're quite active in a lot of states around the country. And so one of the things that we try to do is provide information to support program and policy development. And so this webinar will hopefully contribute to that. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our speakers for today. We'll start with Dr. Gyuk, Director of the Energy Storage Research effort at US DOE Office of Electricity. And then following Dr. Gyuk's presentation, we will hear from Dan Finn-Foley, a senior analyst for energy storage at GTM Research. So that concludes my intro, and I will now pass the baton to Dr. Gyuk.
Well, hello, and welcome to our State of the Industry webinar. For me, among the most significant trends during the last year was the growing interest in resilience and the success of our analytical studies on the concrete example of a small town in Massachusetts. So here we're going to talk about monetizing resilience through new business cases. Obviously, we've been having a lot of disasters last year. The succession of hurricanes, devastating Florida and adjacent states, and constituting a major disaster in the Caribbean, in particularly Puerto Rico. There have been other disasters like earthquakes over in Mexico. One thing, though, is clear, that we can count on disasters staying with us. If you look at the graph of what is happening with the climate, well, the temperatures are increasing, and the number of natural disasters exceeding $1 billion in damages by year is increasing in a similar way. So what can we do? First, we have to keep in mind the economics. It's all very well to say, well, let's go ahead and do something, but it the economics has to work out. And the economics of a project, a storage project, has two components, the cost and the value. I'm not going to talk about the cost today. However, I do note that the cost of energy storage has been coming down steadily. What is interesting is the value of a storage system. It will depend on multiple benefits, both monetized and unmonetized. So among the monetized ones, we have things like arbitrage, frequency regulation, demand charge reduction, which come by the month and the year. But then we have important unmonetized metrics like resiliency. Things like resiliency, military energy assurance, emergency preparedness are difficult to monetize. But often they're the primary reason for carrying out a project in the first place. Microgrids with renewables and storage are obviously a good solution for resiliency. But we can't generally justify it purely on the basis that it will make a facility more resilient. What we have to do is we have to look into the business cases for those benefit streams which can be monetized. So, as an example, I'd like to talk about Stirling, a small town in Massachusetts. And in October 2016, a few of us got together and started digging. And 3 months later, we had a storage facility up and running. One of the characteristics of storage and what makes it so particularly useful for resiliency applications is the fact that you can bring in storage very fast. This particular storage was in the main based on a resiliency grant from the Massachusetts Community Clean Energy Resiliency Initiative. Some money was added from other sources, including the Department of Energy, and we ended up with a 2 megawatt, 2-hour storage project, which was linked to 3.4 megawatts of photovoltaics. So how does this work? We have resiliency, but now what are the benefit streams available? Well, Sandia National Laboratory has an excellent analysis group, which has been working on the monetization effort for quite a while now. And they analyzed the situation, and they worked out that arbitrage, reduced monthly peaks, reduced yearly peaks, and frequency regulation could be valuable sources of income to about $300,000 a year. And considering the capital cost to be $1.77 million per megawatt, you can use these potential benefits and calculate a simple payback of some 6.7 years. So this is very tempting and convincing, in fact. And so we made the proposition to the utility in Stirling that we should utilize these benefits to the max instead of just the resiliency. And this is what it looks like. You wait until you get a monthly maximum, and then just when it occurs, you let your storage loose. And this one event resulted in $16,900 in avoided demand charges. Count them up, and you get some $200,000 per year. So, well, this sounded all very well. And in fact, we caught the very first peak, monthly peak, immediately after the unit was commissioned. But now we have the entire year's actual savings. And these data are by Sean Hamilton, who is running this whole project in Stirling. And we found that for arbitrage, we had some 11,000, 143,000 for the monthly peaks, 240,000 for the annual peaks, and a total of about $400,000 in return of the project. So the analysis works. Our storage unit provided by NEC works as well, and everything is just fine. Now, there were a good number of other municipalities that had similar projects, and since we can't work in detail with all of them, Dan Borneo of Sandia published an energy storage procurement guidance document, which lays out how a municipality in Massachusetts, or in fact anywhere, can start a similar program. It's available for free. We were pleased to get a GTM Grid Edge Award for the project. That is for all of us who were participating in it. And the project has been attracting a lot of international attention, with visitors from Germany, Denmark, England, Japan, Malaysia, and Taiwan, and more interest continuing. But there were also repercussions on a wider scale. Not entirely due to this project, but certainly the project encouraged Massachusetts to adopt a 200 megawatt hour utility energy storage procurement target. Stirling itself is starting a new project, the community project of solar plus storage, with 2 megawatt hours of energy storage and 1 megawatt community solar. 7 more Massachusetts municipal utilities have resiliency grants with storage. And an organization, MMWC, which serves 42 municipal utilities in Massachusetts, is proposing to centralize operations and dispatch services along the lines that proved out so successfully in Stirling. So the moral of the story is, with every successful project, the value proposition will continue to gain strength. But to do this, we need business cases where we have inclusive cost data that tell us everything that costed something, and we need honest accounting of actually realized benefits. Thank you, and now we will hear from GTM.
Thank you very much, Dr. Gyuk. We're switching over to the next set of slides from Dan Finn-Foley at GTM Research. I just want to mention that if you're interested in learning more about the economics of the Stirling project that Dr. Gyuk just discussed, we will have a webinar dedicated to that topic in March. And so if you haven't, if you're on our mailing list, you will be receiving a notice about that. And we will also announce it again at the end of this webinar, giving a date, and you're welcome to, and we invite you to sign up and attend. Okay, turning the presentation over now to Dan Finn-Foley of GTM.
Thank you so much, Todd, and I believe you have my email, so please sign me up for that webinar right away. I can't wait to see some of the value propositions from that project. Really fascinating stuff. And thank you so much, Doctor, for that introduction as well. This conversation of resiliency is one theme that you'll see repeated over and over again as I discuss the recent developments in 2017 for energy storage. So yes, thank you again. Once again, my name is Dan Finn-Foley. I'm a senior analyst with energy storage with GTM Research, focusing primarily on front-of-the-meter energy storage, but with an eye towards the entire market, with the U.S. in particular. Quick word on GTM, if you're not familiar. GTM Research is the research arm of Green Tech Media. Two sort of separate entities, but we work sort of hand in hand. Of course, we've been acquired by Wood Mackenzie, which has been a fantastic opportunity for us to broaden our ability to gather data, wholesale markets, power markets, gas markets, which are, as I'll discuss, increasingly important to energy storage. GTM also has events, webinars, various other things. If you haven't been onto the website itself or seen our research, I very much recommend it. So one quick word on what we'll be discussing during the webinar today. Trying to focus on all of the trends in 2017, quite a task for an hour, but I'll try to hit on all of the important ones, and hopefully we can keep the conversations going outside of the webinar as well. We'll be looking at deployment trends and market drivers, as well as our new energy storage outlook. All of these numbers are being updated as part of our quarterly publication. You can see on the bottom that we do in partnership with the Energy Storage Association, the U.S. Energy Storage Monitor. These numbers that I'll be showing you are from the Q4 2017 report, which includes deployment trends through Q3 2017. I'll be able to share with you some preliminary numbers that won't appear in the slides. Those numbers are still in flux, so take them with a small grain of salt and know that we may be finalizing them. But in order to provide you the full 2017 experience, I wanted to give you a hint of what we're looking at before we've locked those numbers in for Q4 2017. So, starting off, looking at deployment trends. GTM Research tracks deployments across residential, non-residential, and utility-scale energy storage. And through these quarterly deployments, you can see a lot of stories evolving here. Getting back to the topic of value creation, which was mentioned before. The initial burst of energy storage in the United States that you can see here in 2014 and 2015 was primarily around the value of frequency regulation, and almost exclusively within the PJM regulation market. This was a very exciting market for energy storage. The system was overhauled, and dynamic regulation signal was created that energy storage is following. There was a big boom period where a lot of systems were installed front of the meter in the PJM territories. From there, that market saturated and fell off a little bit. That market has since, the signal has been redesigned to make it not as inclusive for energy storage. There are some negative signal designs that dramatically have affected the revenue return of energy storage. So moving from frequency regulation to PJM, the sort of newly proven technology has found a foothold in other markets, specifically In Q4 2016, Q1 2017, we saw deployments come online as a result of the Aliso Canyon natural gas leak and the expedited energy storage procurement associated with it. Once again, this is a resilience question. There was a massive natural gas leak, and supplies for several plants in Southern California were going to be affected. The CPUC authorized an expedited procurement, Southern California Electric and San Diego Gas and Electric, back in, I believe, Q2 2016, started this process, and within 6 months, they were able to add an absolute ton of energy storage onto the system, about 100 megawatts, almost all of it 4-hour duration systems. So these were massive systems responding to a capacity shortfall need in California. And when it comes to energy storage, you really can't pick 2 different items out of the toolbox or the Swiss Army knife, however you like looking at it, for energy storage: short duration ancillary services, long duration capacity. Our 2017 story started off in that conversation with some trailing Aliso Canyon procurement projects coming online, and then a little bit of a trail off as some utility scale systems came online over the course of the coming quarters. In Q3 2017, we actually had a trend back towards the frequency regulation portion, this time in Texas, where one large 30 megawatt system came online to address the fast frequency regulation product in Texas. So already we have a big dynamic of multiple value streams being seen just in these deployment numbers. And in the future, you're going to start seeing more of these numbers as deferral applications, solar plus storage capacity, ancillary services in other markets, and then capacity in California and elsewhere. There's a lot of excitement in this area. Yeah, we're really looking forward to see what happens next. For Q4 2017, we saw a pretty big bump in numbers, up to around 62 megawatts in Q4 2017. But the big story that we're still confirming, and we're excited to report it in full in early March, is that non-residential is actually going to make up a very large market share, more than 50% of deployments in Q4 2017, driven a lot by activity in California and the self-generation incentive program. With energy storage, there's 2 sides to the coin. Always, you can look at things in megawatt terms or megawatt hour terms, just like a water tower has the size of the reservoir and then the size of the hose. This is sort of the size of the reservoir portion. So the longer duration a system is, the more it will appear in terms of megawatt hours. And you can see that the PJM systems, the 2014, 2015 that we talked about, are pretty low duration systems, to the point where they were almost equivalent to some of the medium duration systems that we saw in the non-residential space back in 2015. Then the Aliso Canyon projects came online and really sort of broke the mold. Massive amounts of megawatt hours of energy storage came online in a short time period. Since then, we've had a pretty significant drop down. Numbers like these over the next couple of years are going to become more the norm as we see long duration time shifting for solar resources. You may have seen the announcement that Arizona Public Service is putting in a pretty large system for time shifting. Even Florida is putting in a 4-hour system for DC coupled solar. This is sort of the trend towards longer duration, although shorter duration ancillary services will still make up a significant amount. And of course, within the megawatt hour share, non-residential with its slightly longer duration, meaning peak demand, charge management, et cetera, it's going to make up a pretty big portion as well. I'll get into our outlook moving forward as well. For Q4 2017, we actually have the non-residential making up almost 60 megawatt hours of energy storage, which is fantastic compared to only about 23 megawatt hours for the utility front of the meter scale. So Q4 2017, expect to see this non-residential number raising some eyebrows and making some headlines. Looking at the top energy storage markets, in this particular quarter, Q3 2017, Texas leads the utility scale, but within a nascent market, it's a little hard to make hay out of this because this is all driven by basically one very large project. The rest of Massachusetts, and then GTM sort of breaks out any sort of emerging markets into the all others category. This could include places like Florida, Minnesota, et cetera. In residential, you still have California and Hawaii being the biggest markets there. Non-residential, California and Hawaii are the traditional big markets, but the all others category is catching on a lot as well. Talking about deployments, obviously it's one of the big questions is what sort of technologies are we seeing, what's dominating the market. I should note that for our purposes, we generally track advanced energy storage technologies, which generally includes pumped hydro, generally excludes pumped hydro, I should say, and sometimes includes compressed air energy storage. Pumped hydro obviously is the biggest supplier of energy storage in the United States. If we included it in these graphics, it would wash out all the other installations. So we're really looking at these sort of fast responding battery flywheel sort of resources when we're talking about advanced energy storage. One of the reasons for that is that pumped hydro is generally been implemented in most of the places where it has significant potential. In other regions, it's sort of run into roadblocks with FERC in terms of upgrading or installing pumping systems. It can be a pretty lengthy process to do so. So when we look at these technology comparisons, we're generally looking at battery and flywheel technology. And the story, of course, is lithium-ion is still the king. It's maintained a trend of more than 94% market share for, I think it's 12 quarters straight now. Within this past quarter, Q3 2017, lead acid had a small project of 1.1% market share. Vanadium redox flow battery had a market share of about 1%. And this trend is not going to change in Q4 2017. If anything, lithium-ion will have even more of a market share, with vanadium having perhaps a blip up at the top here. Lithium-ion, as was mentioned before, is simply dominating because of cost. Lithium-ion has been able to scale manufacturing, develop efficiencies, and make cells and modules incredibly cheaply. Because of this, it's been able to displace most other technologies in the market, but a lot of these technologies do think that they have a relevant business model. Flow batteries in particular are optimistic that they can capture longer duration systems, think maybe 6, 8, 10 hours. It's not immediately clear that they can. There have been some pilot programs in place, but nothing on the scale of lithium-ion. So I would expect this trend to continue in the near future. Most of the major projects that we're seeing announced right now are including lithium-ion, and there's really no reason to expect that to change in the short term. In the long term, it's tough to say where you would place your bets. I'm personally a little excited about the potential of flow, but I still think it needs to really get its foot in the door somewhere, make a big splash, no pun intended, in order to sort of dethrone lithium-ion for any significant amount of time. I want to talk corporate investment a little bit, just because in 2017, a lot of interesting things happened. Obviously, based on the bar graph here, this is just Q1 through Q3 2017. We've had a lot of investment take place, and definitely expect that trend to continue in Q4 2017. In total, we're looking at, I think, more than $1.3 billion in terms of corporate deals surrounding energy storage, which is really exciting. The largest deal announced in Q3 2017 was investment in advanced microgrid solutions by a number of investors. We also had some investments received by JLM Energy, just a lot of money trading hands in this market, which is generally the sign of a healthy ecosystem. I like to use the example of a sort of a wilderness where they've reintroduced wolves for the first time. Once you reintroduce wolves, they sort of control the deer population. The deer don't eat the plants around the waterways too much, which means there's less erosion, which means the rivers are more healthy, which means more animals can live there, etc. So when you see a healthy apex predator, it's a sign of a healthy ecosystem. In this case, a lot of money changing hands. It's sort of the market version of an apex predator, which means that you're seeing a really healthy market. There's a lot of investment and a lot of excitement in energy storage right now. Looking at price trends really quickly, I mentioned earlier that historical price trends were down significantly, driven by lithium-ion technology, but also, as mentioned in the first slides as well, by balance of system costs, other processes and improvement costs. We've tracked 2-hour duration costs in dollars per kilowatt hour. We're actually doing a complete overhaul on how we track pricing, and we're going to have a special report out on that in the next couple of weeks, which we're really excited about. Normalizing all of this, tracking utility scale 4-hour, doing by system size as well. But I wanted to include this slide as just a quick benchmark of just how much prices have fallen over the past 3 years, from Q4 2014 to around Q4 2017. For utility scale, I should say, front of the meter here. This is an old slide. So obviously you can have utility scale behind the meter system. So I should say front of the meter here. For front of the meter systems, 2-hour duration, we've seen drops of a median from about $900 per kilowatt hour down to about $750 per kilowatt hour. But even more remarkable is the tightening of the grouping of the prices here, from a high of about 1,300 to a high of about 900. The low obviously hasn't fallen as much, but we're seeing a lot of compression in the market. High-priced bids are being forced out, and there's more competition in the market, which means that prices are going to be under pressure. And of course, as prices are dropping, it's going to be sort of a race to the bottom effect. Nobody wants to be caught up here at the 900 range if your competitors are offering for 750. For 30-minute systems, the trend is pretty similar. We hadn't seen as much movement in utility scale 30-minute systems over the past several years, simply because there wasn't a lot of data to work with it. We're going to be updating these data points for our 2017 year in review energy storage monitor, and it looks like 30-minute prices are going to be dropping pretty significantly. After a lot of projects were installed in the ERCOT system territory, we're going to be dropping these prices a little bit as well. So again, the theme of price dropping continues unabated. It's been the key element that has driven deployments for energy storage. You know, there's a cutoff point for any sort of application that energy storage can provide, where, you know, it's competing against something. It's competing against perhaps not installing energy storage for frequency regulation. You're just going to, you know, have your system be a little less stable. You're competing against perhaps poles and wires if you're looking at energy storage to defer infrastructure investment. As energy storage prices drop, it just makes more sense to use storage in these instances. So expect as prices to drop, the energy storage will continue to displace other assets and continue to grow in terms of market share. One quick note, these prices have dropped very quickly. We do not expect this trend to continue over the next several years. We have had a plateauing a bit of the price drops. Prices will still drop at a pretty significant rate, but nowhere near the 15, 16% annually that we were seeing before. Or I'll check those numbers as well. Looking at behind the meter non-residential, continues this downward slide. As you can see here, the high price, we've seen some compression as well. The median has dropped pretty significantly to about $950 per kilowatt hour. Again, this is from more players entering the market, more competition, especially in California. The market maturing, prices are compressing. Residential, we haven't seen as much compression, simply because the residential market is not as mature as the non-residential or utility markets, front of the meter markets. In the residential space, until recently, it had primarily been an emotional decision. So if a consumer wanted to self-consume their solar energy, it may not make financial sense, but if they believe strongly in going green or having a zero emissions home, that could be something that they could absolutely invest in. Now we're starting to see, as was mentioned before, valuation taking over. It's starting to make sense, particularly with solar plus storage. Residential storage doesn't make a lot of sense simply because a residential customer, in most cases, isn't responsible for time of use rates or peak charge management, although that is changing in some markets. But with solar, as net metering is reformed in a lot of different states, self-consumption becomes increasingly important. And new analysis that we're putting out shows that with the self-generation incentive program in California, a solar plus storage system can break even for a residential consumer. So we're entering bold new territory for residential, and we anticipate this market taking off big time over the next couple of years. Transitioning quickly to market drivers, what have we been looking at that's been driving energy storage through 2017 and earlier? And then what have we seen in 2017 that has been particularly interesting in terms of, potentially creating new business models or new opportunities for storage? Starting quickly on behind the meter policy and market developments, this is looking at Q4 2017, some of the biggest policy updates that happened towards the end of the year, keeping things fresh a little bit. Obviously, any sort of new net energy metering rules as existed in Nevada and Hawaii is a big opportunity for storage. If net energy metering goes away and you have a solar system, self-consumption is kind of your best bet, which makes storage a really good asset. California obviously is always a hotbed for energy storage activity. Q4 2017 was no different. New tariff programs are ongoing in a number of states, and other states in the Northeast are looking into whether energy storage should be allowed to net meter. Again, very important topic. And then Connecticut's DEEP opened its 4th round of microgrid funding, which once again includes incentive for storage. One thing I want to point out is that there is a myriad of activity across the country for energy storage, behind the meter and in front of the meter. It's not really just one location, although you can detect a couple of trends as you look at these things over time. For residential and non-residential storage, take a look at states where it's sunny. You've got a lot of solar potential, a lot of people who invested in solar back when net energy metering policies were perhaps more robust. So that would be your Nevada, California, especially your Arizona. Florida is an interesting example. Florida is increasingly looking to resiliency, as we discussed before. Between Aliso Canyon, Hurricane Harvey, Hurricane Maria, hurricanes hitting Florida, you know, this is starting to look less like a black swan and more like a black flock of swans. Florida has taken interest to that. They're looking at energy storage as a resiliency factor, and I believe they just announced one of the first DC coupled systems, which is really exciting. And of course, in Hawaii, sort of a very unique market, or I shouldn't say very unique, a unique market, because as an island state, it's the economics for storage become much clearer. Electricity prices are generally more expensive. There's more incentive to self-consume, etc. Going into front-of-the-meter policy market developments, focusing on the latest ones from Q4 2017, there's a bunch that I want to draw your attention to here, and then one big one that didn't make this slide that I want to discuss. Starting out on the federal side, you may have heard that there was a tax bill proposed, and it's sort of moving through budget bill, I should say, for the next 2 years. It did include a lot of incentives for things like fuel cells, biodiesel, all these technologies. Energy storage didn't make the cut, unfortunately, so no ITC for energy storage yet. 4 bills have been introduced in the U.S. Senate, but based on how much they have going on, you know, I don't really anticipate the Senate moving on a non-hot topic issue like energy storage right now. All of the different ISOs are moving forward with energy storage. You know, the PJM capacity market proceeding is sort of ongoing. ERCOT dealt a setback to energy storage when their shareholders rejected a potential new rule that would have benefited it. And yeah, 2 things I wanted to point out here. One is Oregon. Portland General Electric announcing plans to install $100 million worth of energy storage totaling 39 megawatts. You might wonder, why 39 megawatts? Well, that's actually the high limit for the Oregon Energy State Storage Mandate. If you go back and look at their 2014 peak demand, 39 megawatts is 1.1% of their 2014 peak demand, which is the high limit for the energy storage mandate. I'm not sure exactly why the legislature installed a high limit for the mandate, but they did, and the Portland General Electric, a utility, said, we want to hit the maximum of that. So that's a pretty big deal to me when a utility wants to, outstrip the legislatures. That doesn't happen very often. California, of course, moving forward, but 2 big news items I would watch at the end of 2017, but really will affect 2018. The Puente gas plant in Southern California Electric and the Calpine gas plants in Pacific Gas and Electric. These 2 have been dealt serious setbacks. SCE is reviewing energy storage to replace the proposed Puente gas plant, and the CPUC ordered PG&E to review preferred resources and energy storage instead of the Calpine must-run resources plants. These are 2 instances where energy storage could potentially displace a natural gas asset. And if that's not a big signpost for you, I don't know what to tell you. Very exciting time to be in the front of the meter policy. Quick look at utilities again. States requiring integrated resource plans. This is more of a 5, 10, 15-year window that we're looking at. But pretty much every state has an integrated resource planning or similar requirement. And you can see by this map, many states are now including storage in their resource planning. And it's states that you might not expect, you've got Kentucky, Virginia, North Carolina, Utah, places where you may not traditionally expect to find progressive energy legislation. Energy storage is so effective now that utilities can't really ignore it. They're actually moving faster than legislation. And from secondhand experience on my end, I can tell you that they're very interested in the opportunities that energy storage has. Looking at these states again, a little more detail. The one that I would highlight here, I encourage you to review this in more detail when you get the slide deck, was the Arizona Public Service. They had 4 megawatts of energy storage in place when they came out with their integrated resource plan that proposed 500 megawatts by 2032. That's a more than 100 times increase, right? 125 times increase of energy storage from what they have in the pilot phase to what they're proposing. That's a really big deal. And in fact, they put together 7 different portfolios. In every one of those portfolios, they had 503 megawatts of energy storage. So it was going to happen. And in 2 of them, they were examining if it would be useful to have more than a gigawatt of energy storage in their integrated resource plan. So utilities are coming at energy storage in a big, big way. It's almost like a power play to me, where they are investing in it heavily. They want to operate it. They want to take the benefit of it. So again, that APS's integrated resource plan has already sort of set the stage for Arizona to become a leading state. Big announcement there that they may be considering a 3 gigawatt energy storage target. APS, of course, has their solar storage plan that they announced, I believe, yesterday. So keep your eye on this space. I know I say that a lot, but it's going to be a big year, 2018, for energy storage. Wanted to highlight quickly a couple of major M&A activities as we discuss that sort of apex predator. Enel acquiring Demand Energy, Wärtsilä acquiring Greensmith, Aggreko acquiring Unicos. A lot of these involve software, which I want to draw your attention to. If you're competing on cost in energy storage, that's a tough game to win. So it's a kind of a race to the bottom. In this case, I find that pardon me, software is often emerging as the differentiator. If you can have cell-level insights into a system, if you can create a warranty because you believe that you can run the system more efficiently than anyone else, that is your ticket to sort of having a differentiated ability. And Enel has already benefited from this as they won a significant portion of PG&E's latest energy storage RFP with Demand Energy involved as well. So transitioning quickly to our Outlook before we go for questions. We track everything in the interconnection queues and pipelines. There was a big bump here. You can see there's more than 15 gigawatts of projects we're tracking, but take these with a grain of salt. Many of them are interconnection queue requests and may not come to fruition. And several of these Arizona projects are gigantic projects that are sort of straining the limits of credulity. But the point here is that California is obviously the dominant player, but there's increasing interest in these other markets. And expect this California section to jump up again with the latest cluster applications in April. Looking at our 5-year outlook, which we just updated, we're finalizing those numbers, so you'll be able to see this with our Energy Storage Monitor Executive Summary. That'll come out on March 8th. We're projecting out to 2023. Some of these 2017 numbers you'll see pushed into 2018 and 2019 as several projects were delayed. But what we're going to see is about 2.5 gigawatts by 2022, which is, incredible. To say that, if you had said that 5 years ago, I think it would have surprised people a little bit that we were actually forecasting that, and that this may be a conservative forecast indeed. What's even more exciting as we look at the market share forecast is that behind the meter systems are actually going to make up more than half of installations and revenue by 2022. That's a really big deal. So solar plus storage as a residential option, peak demand management for non-residential is going to become really an exciting opportunity. And we're already beginning to see this in late 2017 into 2018. This value is going to grow to about the market value to about $3 billion by 2022. And we're forecasting even further than that, 2023 in about a month. So very exciting time to be in the market, a lot of different drivers, a lot of dynamic activity. I encourage you to read the Energy Storage Monitor if you can. The full contents of the report are here. And with that, I'd simply like to say thank you. Hope I was able to give some good details and leave enough time for questions.
And thank you very much, Dan. That was excellent and very informative. We do have quite a large number of questions already. So I'll just jump right in so we can get to as many as possible. One that I'll get out of the way right off the top because it's an easy one is Stirling a municipal utility? Yes, Stirling is a municipal utility. There are a large number of them in Massachusetts. I believe there are 42 municipal utilities in the state. But I just wanted to mention that the cost savings in that project, primarily through the reduction of capacity and transmission costs, are not savings that only a municipal utility could take advantage of. They're savings that any utility in the region could. These are services that utilities purchase through ISO New England. So those prices are set across the 6-state ISO, and any utility in that region would have the same opportunities to reduce those costs. The costs for those services are different in other regions depending on how they're determined. For example, in New England ISO, the capacity cost is a 3-year forward capacity market, so you can actually look ahead 3 years and see what those prices are going to be. That's not always the case. And of course, large areas of the country aren't in a wholesale market run by an independent system operator. So in those cases, it's harder to determine what those values are. But it is true that municipal utilities, but also other utilities can realize those same cost savings. So moving on to questions. How has the size of storage projects changed over the years?
Great question. The size of a storage project generally directly correlates to its application. And what we're seeing is a definite trend towards longer duration systems. Initially, battery energy storage systems were mostly cost competitive with frequency regulation projects because they were short duration. A 30-minute system requires half as many batteries as a 1-hour system, more or less, which means that if batteries are relatively expensive, you can build a pretty cheap one for a half-an-hour system. Now, what we're seeing is more of a movement towards capacity application systems, time shifting. This is much more towards the 2-hour and then even 4-hour system. From there, true renewable integration can require on the order of 5 hours to 6 hours, as we've seen in some projects in Hawaii. And there was an announced deferral application project for Nantucket, basically deferring a second undersea cable from the mainland, which I believe is an 8-hour system. So the trend that we're seeing for the front of the meter space is definitely towards longer duration systems. For behind the meter space, I think we're seeing a similar trend, but not as severe. Essentially, the main business case there is peak demand charge management. So as long as you can ensure that you can hit your peak within a certain number of hours of charge, you're pretty good. But then again, having more backup, having more resiliency means a longer duration as well. So expect to see those megawatt hour numbers climb.
Okay, thank you. There's another question regarding duration. Do you see any role or need for long duration storage ranging on the weekly to seasonal time frame? I'm going to guess the answer to that is probably not, because the utilization rate would be so low. But any thoughts on that from either of our presenters?
Yeah, on my end, I would just say that the economics of that are not there. There is definitely a use case for seasonal energy shifting, whether it's solar or wind, etc., or just bulk seasonal energy shifting. But for now, generally speaking, the more you can use the battery, the better return you're getting on it. And with seasonal shifting of using it maybe just a couple times a year, the economics are not quite there yet. But I believe they could be very much in the future.
Well, to jump in there, pumped hydro in a way is seasonal storage. And if we get compressed air, which is an interesting technology, that would be a longer term storage too.
Yes, that would be. Would it have to be cheaper on a per unit basis in order to make sense given a very low utilization rate, or do you see it as having a greater value just based on the duration?
No, I think with compressed air, for example, because you have such a huge reservoir, you would be doing short duration use cases, but you could be, if you wish, trickle charging the reservoir as you go on and amass a huge amount of energy back there to use whenever you need it on a seasonal basis.
Okay, good. So you're using both short and long duration applications with the same system.
Right. That would give you the economics.
Great.
Absolutely, and that would be confined to pumped hydro or compressed air because you would have that sort of geological storage medium, whether it's a lake reservoir or an old mine shaft or some depleted natural gas site where you can store things. So that sort of defers the cost of the storage volume, whereas with a battery, you'd still have to buy all those batteries even though you're not using them. So I wouldn't expect it to be very viable for batteries for a long time.
Okay, great. Here's a question. How can underserved communities benefit from the economic opportunity of the energy storage market? This is something we've tried to address, but I'm interested to hear from the sort of industry perspective. What's the how do sort of low to moderate income communities get in on this, given that they probably are most in need of both resiliency and energy cost savings?
Well, let me jump in there. We are very interested in working with groups such as Native Americans, applications in Alaska, and also residential communities for lower income housing. And that extends on the further horizon into that 1/3 of humanity that isn't even connected to a grid and probably will never be connected to a grid. You know, in Africa, India, where have you. Those in the form of village electricity can benefit greatly from storage. In fact, village electricity is virtually not possible without storage. As far as Indian communities, Native American communities are concerned, we have several projects ongoing which are going to be very exciting. And we are working strongly in Alaska for communities that so far have not participated very much in the electricity market.
I would just add, in addition to the remote communities which can benefit greatly from renewables and storage, we saw the Excel RFP bids for energy storage, wind, solar were coming in at amazingly low rates. You know, if those prices continue, you could be looking at communities where building community solar, community storage may be in a viable way of not only securing resiliency, but making money funding some other programs. So I would expect that to be a big trend over the next couple of years.
Yes, good, thank you. I want to just add to that our sister organization, Clean Energy Group, has done quite a bit of work in the area of energy storage with solar behind the meter at multifamily affordable housing complexes. And the key there is that because they are multifamily and they're generally behind a single meter, they're considered to be commercial customer by the utilities rather than a residential customer. And because of that, there are potential demand charge savings in those facilities. And they're quite substantial in some places. We've seen a couple of these facilities in Boston that are paying $80,000 a year in demand charges, where you could install solar and storage and get a payback of, 5 to 6 years, just from demand charge management. So there are opportunities out there, for underserved communities where you can combine cost savings and resiliency benefits. Okay, moving on. How concerned should we be about lithium-ion lock-in?
Sorry, lithium-ion lock-in?
Lithium-ion lock-in. In other words, how concerned should we be about the idea that lithium-ion may be getting a lock on the market share, and there's no very little opportunity anymore for other chemistries or technologies?
Well, I guess if you're a lithium-ion manufacturer, you wouldn't be too worried. No, it's a well-taken point that obviously whenever you have one technology sort of dominating a market that has multiple other technologies, that can be worrisome from a competitive perspective. You're wondering if you're getting the best price, et cetera. Long term, this sort of head start that lithium-ion got because it is a technology that's been developed so much for consumer electronics, for electric vehicles, et cetera, will trail off as other technologies come into the fold. Longer term, I expect them to be able to compete more. But yeah, in the short term, there still is, of course, competition in the market, keeping prices down. So I guess it depends on from what perspective. From the perspective of energy storage as an industry, I'd say that it's the natural course of the market finding the lowest cost solution. That market is going to continue to do so if it's functioning correctly over the next 5-10 years. And that's when I think we're going to be able to see the opportunity for other technologies to come in and make their claim on particular niche applications, durations, et cetera.
Yeah, I would echo that. The market is as it is, but I would hate to have lithium-ion develop a monopoly because, well, if nothing else, resource diversity. It's not good to rely on one set of materials exclusively. Witness the recent worry about where the cobalt comes from, which is not really resolved as yet. The other question is, what happens with lithium-ion batteries when they are used up? The disposal is a distinct cost, and it's something we really have to consider in the long range. Also, research indicates that there are other technologies that may be substantially lower in cost than lithium-ion. And I would hate to see the research cut off just because there is a successful contender in the market.
Good. Well, you've very nicely set up the next question, Imre, but before I ask it, I want to let people know that prior to the webinar, we confirmed with our speakers that they are able to extend their stay a bit. And given that we have so many people on the line and so many questions, I'm going to extend the webinar just a bit, give us an extra 5 or 10 minutes to get to more of these questions. And so I invite everyone to please stay on the line, and we'll get to as many of these as we can. So the follow-up question is, most lithium-ion batteries come from China. Should the industry be concerned about future tariffs?
All right, well, let me pull out my crystal ball and see what I can find there. Honestly, that is a difficult question to say. I think that in the current political climate, nothing's out of the question. I don't really see anything right now that kind of thing is brewing for storage. The 201 case for solar obviously has been pretty big news and could potentially affect storage. Personally, I'm coming to be on the optimistic side for the storage industry following the solar tariffs. I think that it's positioned to be well insulated or have the potential to recover quickly afterwards. But it's possible that storage simply does not make it a big enough splash to wind up in front of, the president's desks right now. I wouldn't be too worried about it, but again, I'm not willing to rule anything out right now.
Okay. Good. Somebody wants to know, with regard to peak shaving, as these technologies increase and are more widely installed, one can foresee that the price differential will decrease, and that would apply to things like arbitrage as well. Has this been considered in the models? I guess another way of asking this question is, eventually does storage start to eat its own lunch in terms of these capacity related values that it offers?
Yeah, I can take that one quickly. And I actually had the opportunity to ask STEM this, which is a big behind the meter energy storage player in the C&I space, at our energy storage summit back in December. And STEM essentially said, we'd be crazy if we weren't planning for that contingency, either for these demand charge models to change on one end, or for energy storage deployments to reach a point where they start affecting the very market that they're participating in. Arbitrage is a great example of that. If you fix if you are going in and seeing major spikes between the peaks and the troughs, and you go in with energy storage to fix it by bidding into the market when it's low and selling when it's high, eventually you're going to distort that market, and the very opportunity that you were taking advantage of might disappear. And then if you move out, then the problem might reappear again. The complexities of those markets are, very much outside the scope of what I can talk about in 2 minutes here. But that's absolutely something that you need to be concerned about. It's a scientific principle. You cannot examine something without changing it. And this isn't even examining something. This is participating in something. So if I were working in that sort of space, keeping your eye on legislation that could change those things, policies that could change the way demand charges are structured, wholesale markets are structured. There's definitely a lot of risk when it comes to energy storage over the next couple of years. But I'd remind everyone, risk, they teach you this in some class I took. When you're quantifying risk can be positive as well as negative. So keep your eyes open for those opportunities as well.
Great. Somebody wants to know what big questions you're facing with respect to storage's applications to the grid. What areas of grid flexibility do you think will play the largest roles?
Wow, that's a great question. So what areas do we think it'll play the largest roles?
Well, what are the big questions, and what are the areas of grid flexibility that will play the largest roles?
Grid flexibility, that's kind of a big umbrella. I love the question, but I'm not sure how well I can answer it in a minute. Thinking about largest roles, proportionally speaking, energy storage has the opportunity to really dominate any sort of ancillary services frequency regulation market. It's sort of the area it was built to take place in, if the markets are built correctly. And that's a question that FERC was considering back in 2016, may consider in 2018. Now they've gotten through some of the more high-profile stuff. In terms of what questions are waiting to be answered, I think the biggest question to me is, can storage decapitate the duck curve in California, potentially in Arizona? That duck curve was tailor-made for energy storage. You couldn't design something better for it. Moving that cheap solar energy over to the peak hours of demand, taking out peaking assets that are expensive that only run for a couple hours a day, providing frequency regulation during the other periods, that's something storage would be made for. My question would be, is the duck curve going to get worse? And if it does, and it has, can energy storage really be deployed on a large scale to fix it?
Okay.
Yeah, I want to add to this. There are a large number of potential applications for storage, all of which could be beneficial to the grid. But it depends on the regulatory background on which of these applications will actually go to market.
Good point. Okay, I want to address this next question, although I suspect that we may not have a good answer, but several people have asked this. The question is, what's the update on Puerto Rico? What's the progress in rebuilding the grid there? What's the progress in terms of energy storage role there? And so I'm going to throw this open. If anybody has any insight or or information, please go for it. I have a little bit, but I think you guys are you should probably speak to it from both of your perspectives, from the sort of industry perspective and the DOE perspective.
Well, let me answer first because the answer will be short. But yes, DOE has very considerable interest in being involved in Puerto Rico. We are having groups of people going down there almost on a weekly basis, and the intention is to see whether we can, and this would have to work with the legislature, whether we can shake loose a substantial amount of money. And conceptually, we believe that one of the answers is microgrids with long duration storage, because that will anchor the more critical facilities and the more critical communities and the industry in Puerto Rico. How far along the efforts actually are, well, that remains to be seen.
For my part, speaking from what I've heard, talking with people who are involved in those sort of attempts to get energy storage onto Puerto Rico, obviously haven't seen it firsthand, but from what I've heard, just the devastation is beyond what you could imagine from an electrical grid standpoint and otherwise, which regrettably puts Puerto Rico in the position of being able to start with somewhat of a clean slate when it comes to energy. There is an opportunity for, Doctor, as you said, long duration energy storage as part of microgrids, providing resiliency, providing almost 100% renewables. This could be a real testing ground for what we want to have as the grid of the future. Personally, I wonder if there's the political will for that, because in the short term, it will cost a lot of money. In the long term, it may pay for itself. It's hard to say. But it would take a complete rethinking of how we're thinking about the grid on that island. There are a lot of activities going on a smaller scale, installing energy storage behind the meter, working with solar opportunities, trying to build things back up again. But personally, if I could choose what to do, I would want to try to build out storage, solar, other assets, and really treat it as an opportunity to make this grid better than it was before. Because what it was before clearly wasn't enough. Maria was a devastating storm, but it's boy, how many months later, and we still have a significant part of the island without power. So that's just my perspective.
Okay, thank you. Somebody wants to know how the advent of aggregation, or what's sometimes referred to as virtual power plants, will impact the outlook for storage. And I should explain for those not familiar with the term that what this is talking about is behind the meter storage that is dispatched in the aggregate either by a utility or by a third-party aggregator. And third-party aggregators exist, up until now, have primarily existed in order to provide things like demand response by, for example, aggregating, other sorts of behind-the-meter resources and selling them into demand response programs. But storage obviously can function in this way, and we have examples. Green Mountain Power right here in Vermont has a program for residential behind-the-meter batteries, which they then aggregate and dispatch to achieve the same sort of cost savings that we discussed with the Stirling project. And this is being done in other places as well. Southern California Edison has tried it. We have a proposal from a utility in New Hampshire now to do the same thing. So the question is this included in sort of the outlook, and how does this sort of aggregation of distributed storage impact the outlook for the industry?
In terms of the outlook, it absolutely does. But the question is twofold. The first part is, do you have the assets on site to use it? And can you get them all to sort of agree to the principles of it? saying, hey, we need to use your energy storage asset that's in your garage to do our own thing. And you think, well, no, that's my energy storage. Why should I do that? That's one problem. The second one is, of course, policy and regulation. The FERC Notice of Proposed Rulemaking from 2016 that would have affected how energy storage participates in wholesale markets also had a section on distributed energy resource aggregation. And I love the idea of a virtual power plant that can be not only a virtual power plant, but a virtual load source is fantastic. There are so many things that you can do with that, where you can aggregate up, and it turns out that the sum of the parts, this asset, this virtual power plant, is greater than the sum of its parts. I think that moving forward, this is going to be a really big deal, but it requires some regulatory and policy muscle behind it. If there are test beds like Vermont, like New Hampshire, good old New England stepping up again, then maybe we can really set up some precedent here and move forward and show that it has some real value.
Okay, well, if there's no further comment, I think we need to end the webinar. Unfortunately, we didn't get to all the questions, but it is 10 minutes past the hour, and I don't want to hold it open too much longer. So thanks so much to our presenters, Dr. Imre Gyuk from DOE Office of Electricity, and Dan Finn-Foley from GTM Research. And I will just conclude by saying our webinars are all archived, and you can download the slides or watch the entire recording freely at our website. We have a number of upcoming webinars that you might be interested in, and Samantha can tell you a bit about those.
Sure, thanks, Todd. So we have one webinar coming up at the end of February that's on solar plus storage for public and affordable housing. Next, on March 7th, we have a webinar that we mentioned at the beginning of this webinar and several times throughout, I think. This webinar, 1 year in, energy storage proves its worth in Stirling, Mass. This webinar is going to talk about the energy storage project in Stirling. We have a lot of folks joining us for that webinar who've been integral throughout the process of getting that project going, and we'll hear some updates from that. And we'll also hear about the upcoming energy storage work that they have going on. And then finally, on March 14th, we have a webinar. This one is not a CISA webinar. It's actually by our sister organization, Clean Energy Group, with guest speakers from NREL. We'll be talking about new research that they have done on exploring the role of solar plus storage in grid outages and how to value resilience. So you can read more about all of these webinars and register at cisa.org/webinars. So we hope to see you at those upcoming webinars. Thanks everybody for joining us for this one. Bye.